let me see if I can get us started now on the next session. I'm still learning how to do this perfectly, but we'll see. All right. This session is the Futures of Democracy with UNICEF Foresight Fellows. It is being conducted by my good friends Adam Sharpe, who is a UNICEF member and director of this Foresight Fellows program, and another good friend, Ijun Kim, one of the first Foresight Fellows who was in the first cohort, and I guess Fathmath Zanahana Zuhuru, and I apologize for that, Fathmath. A lot of letters in your word there, in your name. So we are all going to be. I'm looking now to how to get to the introductions. Hold on, let me do that. Okay, I will get that here in just a second. All right, introductions. So the youth facilitator is Fathmath. I'll say that again. Zahanath is currently working as a trainee lawyer to be admitted to the bar. Congratulations. We hope that happens soon. She has always had a strong passion for civic engagement, and it led her to participate in the UNICEF Youth Foresight Fellowship. She is also a member of the Youth Reference Group at UNICEF Maldives that has allowed her to contribute and bring new perspectives on the challenges faced by children and young people in the country. She believes that such youth engagement is crucial for fostering more informed and equitable decisions that benefit all for our future. The two more adult facilitators, not always adult, I have to tell you, because I know them, but nevertheless, Adam Sharpe and Ijun Kim. Adam is a futurist, youth engagement specialist, and group process facilitator. His youth foresight research has been widely published, and he won the NGFP Intergenerational Fairness Award in 2022. He is a youth participation specialist at UNICEF Innocenti, Director of Learning at MetaFuture School, and a member of the Association of Professional Futurists. Ijun Kim is a UNICEF Youth Foresight Senior Fellow, making foresight more accessible to young people and leveraging foresight to promote meaningful youth engagement. She is also a member of the Youth Advisory Group at the United Nations Department of Political and Peacebuilding Affairs, through which she works to strengthen the youth, peace, and security agenda in the Asia and the Pacific region. She holds a master's degree from the University of Washington School of Law, through which she explored the intersection of international law and sustainable development. Let me turn it over to our youth facilitator, Fathmath. If you want to get us started, we're looking forward to the session called Futures of Democracy with UNICEF Foresight Fellows.
Thank you so much, Peter, and thank you to Teach the Future and to everyone for being here. And maybe you can spotlight me and Zahanath and Ijun, so it's all three of us on screen. That game that Daniel just played looked absolutely amazing and really engaging and creative. Daniel, I'm just sorry I wasn't tuned in earlier to play it, but I'm looking forward to following up. We wanted to maybe change the pace a little bit and have more of a conversation about a recent foresight exercise that was totally youth-led, run on the futures of democracy. So I'm hoping maybe we can make this a really participatory conversation where some of the questions that I ask Zahanath and Ijun, maybe you can all contribute in the chat, because I think we'd benefit so much from hearing your visions of the futures of democracy and the ways that you've engaged young people in such conversations. Thank you for the intro, Peter. Yes, I'm here representing UNICEF Innocenti, where we're really trying to use foresight to meaningfully engage young people in everything we do, to make UNICEF a more anticipatory and a more youth-centered organization. That means I have the best job in the world, which means I get to work with these inspirational young people who are really embracing long-term thinking and are tremendous advocates for foresight. So being a part of this session today, it matters a lot because I love how bold and brilliant this is. You know, conversations happening all over the world, one after the other, about the future. It's a beautiful thing, and I'm just really excited to be here to give a platform to young people like Zahanath and Ijun. So let me ask you both, and I'd love to hear this in the chat from everyone else who's attending. First of all, I think Peter already gave a pretty good intro as to who you are. But you know, who are you, and why does taking part in this dialogue on World Futures Day matter to you personally? Let me turn over to Zahana.
Hi, everybody. I'm Zahanath from Maldives, and I am taking part right now in the UNICEF Youth Foresight Fellowship 2023 cohort. So I'm the junior batch to Ijun. But yeah, as to the why, I come from Maldives, and in Maldives, we rarely talk about the future. So it's, to get an opportunity to be here among you all and to reimagine and listen to your versions of the future is something I really enjoy and love. So I'm really excited to be here with you all today. So yeah, just simply to say that is, yeah, I'll pass it to Ijun.
Zahanath, by the way, is looking for a futurist from the Maldives, by the way. So if anyone knows one, you need to tell us, because we have a sneaking suspicion. I don't think this is true, but Zahanath is worried she's the only person doing foresight in the Maldives, and I doubt that is true. So we are searching for futurists in the Maldives that Zahanath can meet and learn from. Ijun, go ahead.
Thank you, Adam, and thank you, Peter, for that generous introduction. It's always weird listening to my bio. And please, 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 if you know anyone doing foresight and futures in the Maldives, please reach out to us because we really want to connect Zahana. So my name is Ijun Kim, and as Peter said, I'm a UNICEF Youth Foresight Senior Fellow, and as that name implies, I'm working on youth foresight. And through our work, we really try to challenge some traditional means of youth engagement through foresight. And we do this by creating, safe, experimental, and participatory spaces where young people can just be themselves, sometimes ask the really tough and difficult questions, and make substantive contributions as equal partners. So to be invited to a space like this for World Futures Day, to not only share about a little bit about our work, but to interact directly with the people here, young people and partners, it's really exciting. So very much looking forward to this conversation, and for the rest of you also to join us later in the questions and answer section and also through the chat.
Magic. So democracy. We could have talked about a lot of different things today, but this was the first topic on our minds. Why focus on the futures of democracy? Why is this such an important question for children and youth? Again, if you're in this conversation on YouTube or in the Zoom, I'd love you to share your answers on this in the chat. Why is democracy such an important question for you, Zahanath?
I think, democracy plays such an important role in shaping any country. It's like a pillar. So it helps, promote good governance, also social cohesion by giving everyone a voice. So, but, in countries like Maldives, we are currently seeing less and less young people choosing to vote in elections, and, even the number of invalid votes are on the rise. So the democracy is slowly, declining. So, if we were to create a strong democratic institutions that uphold the value of people, we first really need to figure out, why young people are giving democracy the cold shoulder. So I think we can only do this by engaging young people and children in these type of conversations. And I think that's why, this question of future of democracy is so important, and, why we should, as young people, have a say in this. So yeah.
Yeah, Zahanath, you point out a global phenomenon, really, that there is rising dissatisfaction with democracy all over the world, which was cited in the UNICEF Outlook report last year. Clearly, dissatisfaction is rising, and while some young people are becoming increasingly apathetic, there are other young people in parts of the world like Myanmar, Hong Kong, Thailand, and Southeast Asia with the Milk Tea Alliance movement that have been really fighting tooth and nail to protect democracy and often being violently repressed. So it becomes a real tremendous human rights issue and child rights issue. So this is sort of a flavor of the current context. Ijun, why were we focusing? Why are young people focusing on democracy, do you think?
I echo a lot of what Zahanath said, and especially the fact that young people should be engaged in these conversations. And the current phenomenon of the democratic backsliding, quite doom and gloom. But if I were to bring in a little bit of the positive spin to this conversation, just a little surprising gift. So what we did recently was we reach out to the UNICEF Youth Network, and I think there's around 2,000 people there. And we just simply asked them, what topic do you want to discuss? Or what topic do you believe is the most relevant or urgent to your present and your future? And they said democracy. I have to quickly have a moment of vulnerability here because when I was building the survey, I was pretty confident that we would get the topic of emerging technology or climate change because everyone's always talking about them these days and young people most of all. But as the results showed, I was proven wrong. We had around 650 responses, maybe a little more than that, from more than 60 countries, and over 60% of them selected democracy as their topic of choice. And it was quite, frankly, a humbling experience because I realized how much my own biases, informed by what I thought was pretty committed research, was already shaping my expectations and possibly limiting further areas of research. So the survey showed that yes, young people are frustrated, but they're not apathetic. They do care. So with that wake-up call, that really shaped the rest of the research process. And I think even such a simple conversation with young people has tremendous potential to shape the course of the work that organizations do, how individuals perceive certain social challenges like the current democratic backsliding.
Thank you so much for that context, both of you. Marie Martinez shares in the chat, when did democracy work? What year was it like? This is a great question, especially when the situation can seem so bleak in some places. I love this sort of strength-based question, which is, what are some examples of when democracy has really worked, or when it's been at its best, at its most life-giving? And we can learn so much from these positive examples of experience, and we can bring them, align them with our visions of the future, and buoyed by the optimism of the fact it has worked in the past. So this is a great question, Marie, and so we welcome any answers in the chat. I want to understand what it is that you did. So we had it was certainly hundreds of young people who voted in that survey and said, we want to discuss the futures of democracy. This is the issue we want. I think it was overwhelming. It was like 63%, I believe, of young people voted for this. So that meant that our senior fellows and fellows designed their own foresight workshop for that Global Youth Network on the futures of democracy. So the whole idea of this UNICEF program, the Youth Foresight Fellowship, is to meaningfully engage young people by giving them the say on what we focus on, and then giving them the reins to design their own foresight processes rather than me telling them exactly what to do. However easy that would be, I would love to do that sometimes. But yeah, it's about giving young people the reins. So how did you engage young people in a discussion about the futures of democracy? What were the decisions that you made? And let's keep this chat rolling.
So we were most certainly given the reins, and the senior fellows and the fellows, including myself. So first we designed a virtual workshop and we invited 45 young people, and we tried to be mindful of inviting as a diverse group of people as possible, while understanding the limitations, with technology and language. And the main framework that we used for this conversation was the 3 horizons. And, it guided much of our discussion where we explored Horizon 1, which is the current system, And mostly we assume that that current system is in decline and doesn't necessarily serve where we want to go. And then we have Horizon 3, which is the preferred future. So what do you want to see in the next however many years? And what are some key elements that's going to shape that preferred future? And then somewhere in the middle, we have Horizon 2, where we discuss and really brainstorm the innovations that can either be captured to unfortunately maintain the current system or harness to really bring about and bring the momentum behind creating the future that we want. And I think this framework was especially relevant and valuable to our conversation about democracy because it challenges participants to think both about the present, the near future, and then, of course, the future in the distance, which is the preferred future. And it essentially stretches the mind. And you could really see in the beginning, the participants were struggling a little bit to get in that mindset to think from multiple perspectives and different time frames. But as they ease into this conversation, the guiding questions really push them to think beyond what we're usually conditioned to think. And throughout this process, we also try to be really mindful to ensure that foresight wouldn't be a barrier, but really an enabling element in this space. So something as simple as using easy to understand and simple languages and giving a lot of examples, maybe too much, but to really drive home the point of what these different horizons mean. Just these were a few things that we did to ensure, even for people who have no foresight experience, the conversation first made sense and second, that they felt confident they could contribute to it. And I think this is something when we're so into this realm of foresight, this is something we very easily forget because a lot of the jargon and a lot of these tools and frameworks we use, it becomes very familiar because we spend hours and hours just studying them and using them. But that's not necessarily the case for people who don't have that experience, and especially for young people too. And then after that workshop, so the workshop was, I had a lot of fun. And after the workshop, we also sent out a survey to the broader youth network. And one thing that I just quickly want to highlight from the survey output was that young people have a very, very, very strong sense of agency. When they were asked how they feel about the future of democracy, most were ambivalent, which reflects what Zahanath mentioned and, of course, what Adam mentioned about the global phenomenon. So, yes, they were ambivalent or kind of pessimistic about that. But when asked whether they feel they can do something about that, about the future, a vast majority of them responded yes. So this shows that young people are not apathetic and that in fact they are quite eager to contribute to shaping the future, whether that be specifically about democracy or other social challenges as well.
All right, thank you. This is epic. So Ijun explaining, why the young people chose Three Horizons and a bit of how it went. We definitely need more examples where we can hear from young people what their experience has been like of actually using foresight methods and tools. I want to ask a question now about how young people see the futures of democracy. And Scott Jordan makes a great point in the chat. He's like, democracy has sort of become the default, and when that happens, things start to slide. And what he means by that is, maybe there is a bit of a flaw in, even the question of what are the futures of democracy, because we just sort of assume that that's the only system and that is the system that we want in the future. And I would say in many ways we do, but we sort of colonize the future with our very questions that we ask. Maybe a better question would have been something like the futures of governance or something like that, or maybe citizen participation or decision making. You know what I mean? Maybe something a little bit more open. So yeah, it's a great point, Scott. That you bring up there. It's like we need to, in our foresight processes, we need to be careful of the questions that we ask, so that we can hopefully get more sort of open, innovative, creative answers back, rather than just settling on what Winston Churchill called, the best of a bad bunch, when he described democracy. Winston Churchill, not my hero. So let me ask this question, and I really would love to hear from everyone in the chat, okay? Because I know that we're not the only ones who are asking young people these kinds of questions. How do young people, how do you and how do young people we work with see the futures of democracy? What were some of the visions that were shared? And please share in the chat if you too have if you have a vision for the futures of democracy or governance that you'd like to share, or whether you remember some amazing visions that other young people have shared with you in the past. So go ahead. Let me pass over to Ijun and or Zahanath. Go ahead, you guys.
So based on our conversations with the young people, how they see futures of democracy, and here I'll start by talking about the preferred future. The youth participants really highlighted elements like greater accountability, increased transparency, equitable planning and decision making. And Zahanath and I actually had a really interesting conversation about this, and it actually reflects some of the points that Scott brought up. So really quickly, is it okay if I pass the ball to you, Zahanath?
So I was, having a discussion with Ijun, how our preferred future, greater accountability, transparency, these things actually reflect the mess we are in today, like the rise of, corruption, lack of accountability. These present trends are really reflecting our image of the future we prefer. So I think we should really try to break free from these present trends when imagining a future, dream big for democracy. So was just discussing how we could come up with alternative visions with Ijun the other day. So yeah, back to you now.
I think that's a wonderful point. And I admit I didn't quite think of that. And then Zahanath mentioned, but why do you think these elements of the preferred vision sound so familiar? And I was like, that's a good point. And with the way we shape the research question, and also the internalized biases that we have, the tendency to think of democracy as a default, I do think it really shapes the way we see the future. And in the best kind of research that we do, the foresight research that we do, we would be able to encourage participants to think beyond that, to break out of the mold. So we're really keen to see how this piece of research can evolve as well to address these shortcomings, and then also other parts that I will mention in a bit. So continuing on regarding some of the workshop outputs and the survey outputs, when discussing innovations that can strengthen democracy or perhaps be captured by the current system to maintain it, participants identified education and intersectoral cooperation as high potential spaces for strengthening democracy. First, they saw quality education as really a critical factor in cultivating a democratically empowered population. And they also noted that greater intersectoral cooperation was necessary in, for example, building a conducive environment for civic education or leveraging emerging technology for its benefits to, again, strengthen democracy. And here I want to quickly mention that participants discussed Horizon 1, the current system, and Horizon 2, the innovations in regional breakout groups. And admittedly, while these groups do not fully capture the nuances and realities of each region, maybe even the countries, there were actually really interesting gaps to note between the discussion outputs. So for young people in the Asia and the Pacific group, they were more likely to highlight authoritarianism and corruption as current bottlenecks to democratic participation. And on the other side, participants from the Americas, they actually pointed to the polarization and mis and disinformation as the biggest challenge. So we're already starting to see the lived experiences of these young people. It's informing how they see the really critical challenges and what needs to be tackled first, and what should be prioritized to strengthen democracy. Education was an area of really great interest for young people from Europe as an area of innovation that can, again, either be captured or harnessed, while technology resonated a lot more for participants from the MENA and Sub-Saharan Africa region. So we're already seeing even, we have the tendency to think of the youth or the younger generations as this one big cohesive body, but that's really not the case even. We're starting to see, even if young people have a consensus on what needs to be there for our preferred version of the futures of democracy, there are different ways that they see on what we need to tackle. how we're going to get there and what role young people will play as well. So I think that's something we really should keep in mind when we're engaging with young people. They're not this one giant mass where everyone thinks alike. There is actually quite diverse, a big diversity even within the younger generations. And on that note, these regional differences specifically are something we really want to delve deeper to in the future. So beyond really shaping our research questions to encourage participants to break out of some of the internalized biases, the regional differences and the country context are something we hope to bring into our future research.
Thank you for emphasizing that youth is not one homogenous group who all think the same. There is tremendous diversity. Chandran is making some really valuable points in the chat. Thank you so much, referring to some of his academic engagements in Bangalore, looking at reducing the digital divide amongst senior citizens, and sort of reducing the divide between young and old. And I think this is a really powerful point. It's one of these key long-standing issues is going to be whether technology it has an equalizing effect or the opposite effect, whether it has a positive effect on promoting democracy, whether it be through blockchain technologies ensuring more accountability and transparency in our democratic processes, or it be invading privacy, using social media to sway voters certain ways. What kind of influence on the future is technology going to have? And Chandran brings up this point here about the divide between the generations. We see through our demographics that increasingly there'll be less and less young people supporting more and more old people. No economy in the world is set up to function in that way. But also democracies shouldn't function in that way either. One of the biggest potential impediments to progress will be the older generation having the biggest voting power. And we already see drivers of this in the present. Coming up back to your point, Zahanath, about apathy and young people in the Maldives choosing not to vote, it means they form a much smaller voting bloc. Therefore, if the elderly have all the voting power, then politicians will speak to their priorities in the future rather than the younger generation. And in some ways, not all, that might stymie our progress. So I'm really compelled by examples of where democracy works. Someone asked that earlier. And I know there was a campaign in America, I think it was the last election cycle, where parents were actually sitting down with their kids, sharing with them, who were the different politicians you could potentially vote for, which political parties, what agenda, and then giving their votes to their kids. And I'm also fully behind any effort to lower the voting age. We see in Scotland, they lowered the voting age to 16. So I imagine a future where children and young people have much more say in democratic processes, where at a much younger age, and again, coming back to that point about education, through our education systems, we promote that active civic engagement from an even younger age, and then make sure it's possible systemically. We've got and also Housen, great to see you, Housen, sharing everyone's unique power to contribute informs where we go. Representative elections are repurposed. This is great. I mean, maybe we can open this up. Let's hear some other visions of the future. We have a lot of people on the call right now, and we still have a good half an hour together. So what are some visions for the futures of democracy or governance that you've come across that inspire you? So I'm doing something a little bold here, but I'd love to hear from other people on the call. And of course, Zahanath and Ijun, you can chip in too. What are some visions of the futures of democracy that you've heard that inspire you or that you have? Of course, there may be, visions of the futures of feudalism. I mean, anti-democratic future visions. I mean, I don't know if anyone is excited to go and see Dune 2, but I think one of the most and if you haven't seen Dune or read Dune, I would thoroughly recommend you go, you check it out. But I mean, one of the most compelling things about Dune is it's the feudal future. It's millennia into the future, where just a number of small, like, of families, you know, own the whole universe. And it's an enslavement future. There's no participatory democracy in this future, and that's frightening. But sometimes it's good to come across that kind of fiction, can spurn us to action potentially, or just be a really fun day out, you know, if you don't want to think too deeply about it. Scott shares, and Scott, feel free to turn on your camera and open up your mic if you want. You're talking about here your fear of corruption and politicians. Why don't you share with us?
Yeah. Sorry, I hit enter before I finished, so I got about half of it out. So there's this, I get this sense that there's this sentiment of leave politics to the politicians because young people can't even hold office. Many of them can't vote until they're, I mean, here in Malaysia, they just passed an amendment to lower the voting age from 21 to 18. So Malaysia's a little bit behind the rest of the world in that regard. But it's interesting because no one knows what to make of this 18 to 21-year-old group. Most think not worth my time, or most are just like, it's too uncertain, I'll just lean on my base, or some of these sorts of ideas. And I think there's a sort of disenchantment, there's an inaccessibility. And so, well, what do young people have? They have technology, they have their mobiles, they have social media. So why I can't be there on the floor of Parliament or in the halls of Congress, but I can do a mass demonstration, do we can protest certain things, we can boycott certain things. I have more power in this weird disruptive space, and I don't think that's healthy in terms of having a proper governance structure. And so I'm just wondering
Right.
how how do we get young people to, like, because my thought is, well, you have two options: either you tear it all down, which could be very disruptive and destructive, or you get in and you change the culture from within. But that requires a very concerted effort, with people who are dedicated to basically, spend 10, 20 years that may just fail or blow up in their face. And so I don't know how to get past that part. How to tell a young person, like, can you just give up your life and maybe the next generation will have an opportunity? And as a millennial, I felt like that was kind of our role. Our role was to, you get the subsequent, one generation fails, the next generation fails, the next generation. Well, maybe millennials should just bite the bullet and just we'll do all the nasty stuff, and then maybe Gen Z can figure it out from there on. But even that is like a really full-out approach. So if other people have ideas, I'd love to kind of hear that.
Scott, you make this great point that and it connects a little bit to what Peter's saying in the chat, where he's talking about how can young people learn to be citizens in a democracy when their schools and many of their families won't even allow much involvement in decision making. And this comes back to Zahanath's point about the importance of education and civic education. If young people are not included, they don't have opportunities to contribute meaningfully and in a healthy way to decision making, to the decisions that impact their lives. They inevitably turn to protest, right? And that's a good thing. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but often that appears to be the only route to be heard, the only route to actually make a meaningful difference. And this is why, I think in our schools, from an early age, we need to practice this principle of meaningful youth engagement, which is giving young people the space and the agency and the opportunity to shape their own future. And this is why, intergenerational citizen assemblies, these. Recently in my country, in the UK, the Labour government just U-turned on citizen assemblies that were going to be used to engage citizens in questions around housing and devolution and these other critical long-term issues, basically because they don't think young people have the expertise to contribute. But my goodness, what kind of civic society are we going to have if you don't give young people the opportunities in the first place? All they're going to do is protest, vote, or just boycott democracy altogether. Yeah, as Peter says there, turn to protest or disengagement. So I think one of the visions of the future that we're seeing right here is our schools as civic education spaces, in a similar ethos to the Montessori of giving young people like agency over their own lives and over what they learn and building that agency. So this is a beautiful vision. We're welcoming more contributions in the chat. I'm going to move on to the next question that I have here, but I'd love us to stick on this question of visions. What are some of the actions that young people have been encouraging UNICEF and other stakeholders to do to bring about a preferred future for our democracies? So we're talking here about innovation in our education systems and turning them into civic education spaces. I love that vision. I champion that vision. Zahanath, how do you see this?
So we got the opportunity, young people got the opportunity to contribute to the Global Outlook report of UNICEF 2024 this year. So we had our own youth section where we came up with actions or recommendations that we can do to promote democracy. So when coming up with these actions to promote democracy, we brainstormed mainly on 3 areas, which was technology, climate change, and education. And for technology, really our emphasis was on creating more opportunities for democratic involvement using tech and breaking down those barriers. I see in the chat we have been talking about the generational gap and these things. So we identified actions that can break these, and in turn it can boost transparency as well. And for climate change, we really stress the pivotal role of youth and indigenous communities in the climate movement. And we voiced out that they should get an opportunity to directly have a say when it comes to policy decisions made around climate. And as for education, we are talking a lot about education, which I was mainly part of formulating. And I believe, education will definitely be the superhero for democracy. Like, I believe education can bring a huge change. And one thing we really suggested was, providing more capacity building for young people, which can, foster active participation in the decision-making phase. This can be, something as simple as having mentorship programs open for youth where they can go and interact with parliament members. So, because it's about strengthening democracy through education is not just about learning the necessary skills. It should also be about, opening opportunities for young people and children where they can experience relevant values and, get a more holistic understanding of the world around them. So, yeah, I was really grateful and really happy to get this opportunity to contribute to the Global Outlook report, and I hope UNICEF keeps doing this. So I highly recommend you guys to check it out. But yeah, that is like some things that we had a say, and this really shows, that young people really care. And as Ijun said, we are not apathetic, we're just frustrated. And if I were to share a vision of my vision to democracy, in my country, the youth representation is so less in parliament. So I would definitely love to see some more youth members in the parliament. There should be mandatory seatings in the parliament for youth. That is my vision. Yeah.
This is epic. Thank you so much, Zahanath. I hear echoes of your message in what Peter says here. In schools we teach civics, but it's all content about how government works. It's not an opportunity to really practice it in their lives. And this is a great point. I'm buoyed with optimism when I hear examples of children using the Convention of the Rights of the Child to take their governments to court over inaction over the climate crisis. That, to me, a strong judicial system and young people understanding and realizing their rights, their rights as right holders, to actually, compel governments to act on the critical long-term issues of our times. I'm buoyed by those moments, and I think there's been a wave of that sort of legal activity led by children and young people, and more of it, I say. And Sabrina has captured probably the quote of the session so far, which is education as the superhero of democracy. And I think that's a foresight research question that maybe we seize on, and go into much more depth on. Scott also shares many parliaments require that every ethnicity and gender has a certain percentage of representation in the House. Why not age demographics too? Absolutely, absolutely. Again, it's the Convention of the Rights of the Child is the most ratified international treaty in the world, and it says young people have a right to have their voices heard. They have a right to speak on the issues that they care about. So why shouldn't they have a right to contribute to our democracies meaningfully? I love this. Back to this question of the actions young people are encouraging UNICEF and other stakeholders to take. Ijun, do you want to contribute anything here?
If I could actually just come in really quickly on Scott's comment, because I think that's amazing. Having a systematic mechanism that ensures young people are equally represented in Parliament. And this is actually another reflection on the conversation Zahanath and I had. So you can tell we talk a lot. And we were talking about these quota systems, and actually we did explore this a bit when we were talking about Horizon 1, the current system, that these quota systems were actually what young people saw as something positive in the current system. So real quick note, Horizon 1, the Three Horizons framework, doesn't only encourage you to talk about what is bad about the current system, but the guiding questions actually encourage you to also kind of shift perspectives or pivot very quickly and think about what do we want to retain of the current system. And one thing that young people did want to retain and improve upon was the quota system. But then based on the conversation I had with Zahanath as well, these mechanisms are great, but then empowered by these mechanisms, how can we ensure that these young people are not simply just there as numbers in parliamentary spaces, but truly contributing to the substantive conversations? And I think this really goes back to the capacity building and ensuring that young people and children are fully empowered and that they feel confident that they can contribute to these spaces. It can't be a 1 or 2 year thing and just having them in the spaces and making sure they're taking up the seat. It really does have to be maybe a decades in the working kind of project. And Scott, your point is, how do we ask young people to give up their lives and really, work on this, and without any guarantee that it's going to be successful or not? But I do think, especially now with these almost existential crises that we're facing with climate change, we're starting to see that people are willing to think even beyond that. Maybe me contributing to this conversation won't have a world-changing effect, but I can contribute one little block to this long road of getting where we want. So I do think that kind of mentality is really surfacing as we're doing a lot of community-led movements, as people are becoming more and more engaged in these conversations. Maybe they're not quite ready to be action-oriented yet, but that element of being aware of what's going on and then being part of these conversations, I do think that's a beginning. So beyond the quota systems that we have now, and of course, ensuring that young people are represented, how do we really drive the momentum behind the capacity building for young people to confidently go into these spaces and own it? Do I have an answer to that? No, but I do think it's something that's really worth delving into as we, beyond democratic participation and capacity building, as we really reimagine what education means for young people and also other generations too.
Thank you so much, Ijun, and sort of building on that, the brilliant Zabrina. Zabrina, it's so lovely to have you here. I don't know if you can, but can you just turn on your camera and turn off your mute and just share, one of your ideas around youth participation in legislative bodies? Because I think what you're getting to here is a sort of reframing the incentive structure, reframing the systems to encourage this very healthy relationship between young people and democracy. Please go ahead and share. Hey, good to see you.
Hi, everyone. I was actually, it's late here, so I'm headed to bed, but I couldn't resist coming on, and I looked on YouTube really quickly and I saw that you were still going, so I thought I'd come on. But I co-facilitated with a brilliant young lady earlier today at I believe it was 5 p.m. London time at 12 p.m. my time. And we talked about the future of human rights, and we spanned the gamut, and the young people that were on in those sessions in that afternoon time frame were just so they were just so brilliant and so electric, and had a sense of their own agency. And so I started to wonder, and I put in the chat, and then are we getting to a point where, as we know it, we need to be post school, or a possibility of being post school, so that you have, because the other experience that I had the pleasure of, I served with 3 young people when I was serving on the Board of Education. And these people took up their legislative position or their governance position as students who were in the system. And they had, in a lot of ways, more knowledge about how the policies that we were passing would impact them and other students than we did. And so, and when you think about how in high school, you have students getting college credits and graduating from high school with an associate's degree so that they could do STEM, STEM fields, right? But, and then you have other programs where students go into apprenticeship. Well, why can't they get why can't they get credit to fulfill their responsibility doing civics? So there's a lot of possibility here. It's just, again, the will of policymakers and system leaders to allow, because one thing, if nothing else, if I wasn't taught anything else today, I believe that young people, particularly these newer generations of young people and the generations to come, are poised to tackle these wicked problems, or these global wicked problems, in ways that previous generations were just not prepared to do. The problem is that they're encumbered by the system of education that they have to go through in order to be ready. They're ready now. Many are ready now. And I heard that, session after session after session, and Scott can attest to it too, because I've seen Scott on these calls since 11 o'clock last night Eastern time. So yeah.
Well, I'm showing some appreciation for the intergenerational solidarity we have right here in this room, and I think that is something to hold on to and really, really promote. And I think what's cool about this call is, without using a foresight method, we're kind of unconsciously doing a little futures triangle work here. Like you said, I think that the image of the future is very, very strong of what a thriving democratic system and populace might be, where young people are truly civically engaged, but the weights of history are truly in our systems that disincentivize, that treat civics like an indoctrination project rather than an activation space, a space of imagination and real agency. And so some of these ideas that are coming through are truly lightening those weights, like Peter, suggesting, shouldn't we put civic literacy on the same list as literacy, numeracy, media literacy, futures literacy? I don't think they have to give up their lives to practice civic virtue. So these systemic enablers might lighten the weights to help bring about the preferred future that we want, which is young people who are truly engaged, not disengaged. But let's bring this back to Zahanath in the Maldives, because Zahanath began this call by saying, thank you so much, Sabrina, for staying with us so late and just always contributing knowledge and dropping truth bombs. But Zahanath, you started the call by talking about the apathy that young people in the Maldives feel. Like, when you hear conversations like this, do you think it's as simple as, these sort of systemic enablers and integrating them into schools? I mean, you can be really honest here, let's create this safe space. I mean, how do you think, I'm putting you on the spot here, but do you think that if we were to bring it back to that futures triangle, do you think the image of a better future is strong enough? Do you feel like the weights of the system are too heavy? Like how do you think we get to that preferred future in the Maldives and where young people are really engaged and not feeling apathetic?
That's a big question, Adam. Oh my God. I think, the systemic weights that are putting us down goes like through generations, and I don't think it's going to be easy to break those. So, okay, like education could really be a vital role, but just education, I don't think will be enough. Like we still would need more youth engagement, and we still need to tackle other issues that really negatively impact democracy. Democracy in itself is a very good thing, but things like corruption and lack of accountability, these things really like make the image of democracy go down. So I think, the weights, we have a lot of weights, but with the right resources, and I think with opportunities, when you open opportunities for youth and bring new perspective, I think that would definitely help light the weight. Because right now in my country, there are parliament members sitting in the parliament for like 20 years in a row. Most people have been like just there in the parliament. So why don't we bring new perspective, So especially young perspective. So I think apart from education, setting up a court, like a number of young people, minimum number of young people to be in the parliament could be a really huge step. Especially like in countries like in Maldives, there's I think 80 parliament members, and only 2 of the parliament members are under 30 years. And I think that says a lot, that youth are not being represented. So I think I believe, I have hope, like these kind of conversations really, makes me feel hope that there are people who care about making a better democratic system. So I think it's a collective effort, we have to collectively work and, fight. It's a big fight because it's not easy. So yeah, that's just what I have to say for that.
Thank you so much, Zahanath. We're about 5 minutes away from the end of the call, but it's been really enlightening. You can keep up with everything that the fellows are doing at UNICEF in Ijun. So Zahanath is one of 12 fellows who this year are going to be working with UNICEF country offices and running foresight experiments in each of those countries on issues that they decided to prioritize alongside the country office, and really localizing foresight methods and tools to those local contexts. And I believe Zahanath might be exploring the futures of schools in the Maldives, which I'm sure the team at Teach the Future would love to learn more about. Again, this is in the works, but this is all coming up over the coming months. So keep up with us at UNICEF in Ijun. We do have a global youth network. And so if you have youth networks who would like to potentially be invited to join our global foresight processes, if you're maybe they might want to apply to become a fellow in next year's cohort, reach out to us. Check out the Outlook report from this year. I dropped a link in the chat. This is the second year in a row where young people have designed and led their own foresight experiments, and that has contributed directly to sort of a UNICEF flagship report on the state on the issues facing children around the world. So please check that out. And yeah, I think, in terms of weights, Zahanath, your point about corruption is so important. I heard Chris Ernie at the UN Futures Lab the other day say something, it was important. He said, until we address the incentive structures of a few extremely powerful companies, so they can use their resources for the good of the planet, we'll forever be dealing with the kaleidoscope of emergencies that larger scale trends and threats cause. And this is particularly relevant to democracy, the influence of lobbying groups holding us back from progress on the issues that young people really care about, like the climate crisis and others. A final word from you, Ijun. I don't know if you have like a good sign off prepared in the remaining minute or so, but please go ahead.
Sure, just to tie a little bow. I think we're still battling the misconception that strong youth representation means replacing the other generations, but that's not true, especially in parliamentary spaces. What we're really pushing for is, Adam, you said it, intergenerational solidarity. Bringing in youth perspectives does not mean replacing other perspectives. It's just adding to the bucket so that we can be more agile to address and respond to the needs of the general population. So that's just a little note that I want to emphasize for this call. But thank you everyone for this amazing opportunity. And I had a lot of fun just speaking, but also listening and reading your comments. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. That's a great little bow. So I guess with that, from me and the UNICEF Youth Foresight Senior and Fellows, it's been a real pleasure. And let's keep this this inspirational conversation going. Thank you so much.
And the pleasure was mostly ours, Adam and Ijun and Zahan. I have to tell you that